One. Okay, we're recording now. So welcome everyone to our webinar tonight, sponsored by the Society for Technical Communication, the Philadelphia Metro chapter. I'm Danielle Villegas. I am the acting president of the chapter. And tonight we'd like to welcome Anukware Adzima, who's going to be giving us a webinar on translating technical documentation. I've seen a preview of this the other night, and I think you're in for a real treat. Before we get started, I just wanted to get a little bit of chapter business out of the way because this would normally be our chapter meeting. So let me just get to the next slide. Just to let you know about some upcoming events. In November, we're going to be having a virtual open house. It's actually going to be our 50th birthday party. Our chapter is 50 years old this year. So we are going to be having a party, even though it's virtual. And it's also an opportunity for anyone who's interested in STC, in the Philadelphia Metro chapter, to come and talk to me and other officers and other veteran members to get a feel for what STC is about, and especially the things that our chapter has done in the last 50 years. So that should be a lot of fun. That's going to be on November 17th at 7 p.m. December, we're going to have a virtual holiday party. We had one last year and it was a lot of fun. I think we'll be having our second annual ugly sweater contest. So that should be a lot of fun and some games going on. We have not picked out a date, but we'll have that out soon. In January, we plan to have another webinar that's about UX design. It's based on a presentation that was done at the STC Summit this past year by Stephanie Saylor, called The Design of Everyday Things. And again, I saw it at Summit. It was excellent. And I asked Stephanie to present it for us. And she said, absolutely, no problem. And just to let you know what's coming up in 2022, we are having our Dodd to Board Scholarship and Student Membership Drive. We are going to be doing Conduit 2022. That's our regional conference, which has kind of gone beyond regional because people come from all over, but it's basically our Mid-Atlantic Technical Communications Conference, and we have a lot more things coming up, so stay tuned for that. Just a little plug for STC for those of you who are not familiar with it. We do encourage you to check us out. Right now, we're having a big membership drive for the STC. There's a lot of great things if you're in technical communication and technical writing, UX, content design, content strategy, any of those kinds of things, or beyond that. And what you get as a member is pretty much what you get out of it is what you put in. But you have access to professional networking, professional education. As a member, you get discounts on the education that is provided by the STC and with the STC Summit, which is their international conference, and a lot more. And when you do renew, we do encourage you to include the Philadelphia Metro chapter, or if you don't happen to live near the Philadelphia area, you are welcome to join us, even if you're not local. But if you do have a local chapter, or even we have special interest groups as well on specific topics where people like to get involved, like instructional design or technical editing, or a myriad of other topics, they are available. One of the nice things that's going on with the membership right now is if you renew right now, your membership will cover the rest of 2021 as well as all of 2022, because they do their memberships and everybody's membership ends at the end of a calendar year. So you get like 2.5 months free if you do that. And if you happen to join the Philadelphia Metro chapter, what we're doing is we're actually going to be having a raffle, so that whoever is renewed or renewed their membership with the chapter or has joined by January 1st will be entered into a raffle for a $25 Amazon card, which is basically a refund for your chapter membership. So you can think of it as like getting a free membership. We just pay you back with an Amazon card instead. So if you want more information about how to become a member, go to stc.org. And the last little thing I want to say before we get started is, as a chapter, we need you. Right now, we are looking for volunteers to help rebuild our council and run the chapter. All the people you see in this photo are people who have moved into board leadership or into board committees, and we need some new faces and fresh ideas to come in and help run the local chapter. We have positions open in programming, which is basically setting up events and activities, membership, which includes academic outreach, and communications, doing the publicity, helping to maintain our website. It's a great opportunity to become a leader or gain some management skills. It's free to be a volunteer, obviously, and we do provide training in all of these ideas. So if you're interested in any of this, let me know. You can contact me at president@stcpmc.org. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to make our presenter tonight, Anukware Adzima, our presenter. So again, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
You're welcome.
1 second, let me try to share my screen here. Okay.
As we already discussed before we started recording, GoToMeeting is not the friendliest conferencing app in the world. So there we go. Awesome.
Yes, please, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. So, hi, everyone. I am Anukware Selase Adzima. I like to say my full name because at different places, different people address me by a different name. Some people use my first name, which is Anukware. Others use my middle name, Selase. For example, at work, everybody uses my middle name, Selase. So, yes, it's very nice to be here. I am the Global Business Development Manager at CETRA. I started working with CETRA in 2007 as a translation project manager. I left and I went to graduate school, and I returned, and I've since been with the company. I would like to turn off my camera for now. I'll turn it back on later on, and with all of those of us who feel comfortable turning our cameras on and mics on, we can have a conversation. So I'll turn my camera off right now, so we can get started. Okay. All right. So I joined STC earlier this year and actually attended the summit. CETRA was an exhibitor. It was I really enjoyed the summit, and so I am also equally I am happy to have this opportunity to share my experience working in the language services industry, and particularly working at CETRA Language Solutions. I hope we can make it as interactive as possible. Please feel free to stop me to ask any questions you might have at any point. We also have some time at the end to share our translation stories. Those of us who have done some translation work or engaged translation vendors, we can also make comments on anything you see here or from outside this presentation. And then you can also help answer any questions you might have. So my camera is off. All right. So the first thing I like to do here is to find out how many of us actually know a little bit about the industry. So I'm going to let's take a quick poll here. I see there are 11 of us online right now. I'm going to put something in the chat. So it reads this way. So I have, send. So it is, how often does your team, unit, department, company use translation services? Let's give ourselves some 30 seconds. Please just type in. If it's always, you always use a translation vendor, sometimes, or you've never. I would like to figure out how many of us here. So please feel free to type in your answer.
Just put it in the chat again because you actually sent it to me only.
I actually sent it to only you. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Okay, so I see.
Looks like mostly
Okay,
sometimes
so
or always.
yeah, so sometimes it's more right now. There are about 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, and then always one person, and then someone
Who
isn't
knows it's
sure.
coming, but I don't know how much.
Okay, so 5 now.
I only said sometimes because Michelle said sometimes.
There you go.
So I figured that must be right.
Okay, so I think so far we have 5, right? So 4 people said sometimes, one person always, and I think another person said, I don't know. Okay, all right, thank you so very much. Thank you. Well, the reason why I put that up is I'll try to give a little bit of background about the language services, or just an overview of the language services industry. So no problem. Okay. All right. So this is the outline that I'm going to follow. So I'll try and give an overview of the language services industry. And we have here, this is a webinar for technical communicators. So when we talk about technical translation, how are we defining within this context? When we have a translation project, you want to do a translation. So many people are involved. There are different processes. So who are those people, the stakeholders, and what are some of the important things we need to consider? And then I will use our company as an example, just to give the practical aspect of it. Then I'll show a few things about translation difficulties. One thing particularly will be false friends, and I'll explain what that is shortly. And then we can share some translation stories. Those of you who have used translators sometimes, or always, or not at all, or have any story anywhere, we can share. Or if you have questions, we can also ask and answer questions. All right, so we have about 4 organizations that dedicate their work to research on the language services industry. One of them is called Slater. So I took this information from Slater Report 2020. Slater estimates that the market size of the language services industry is $24 billion. And also the clients who seek work in the language services industry are those listed there: aerospace, defense, engineering, manufacturing, finance, gaming, life sciences, media, professional services, public sector, technology, retail. Now, the gaming industry, or the gaming sector, is not the biggest, like the client who gives the biggest chunk of work to language services providers. But I would say that is the fastest growing right now. The biggest is like the public sector, which is like the European Union, US government, contractors, so they give a lot of work also. But all these end clients actually give quite a bit of work to language services providers. All right, so here is a list also from Slater. These are what they classify as core services and adjacent services. Personally, I'm not very conversant with every single one of them. But the comment I can make is very, very common is something like editing, translation, transcription, proofreading, review. Some of those are very, very common. Now, the adjacent service, for instance, you have a document to translate. Maybe it's about the training manual, or it is for marketing. Some of these things you can have images in them, and sometimes text embedded on some of these images. So some of this would lead you to seek something like a graphic designer, desktop publishing task that can also be added to it. So services that are direct or core to our business are there. There are others that, by virtue of what we do and what is needed, we bring in other services as well. So you find a lot of companies that do not do only translation. Some are even training machine translation engines. Some are offering other forms of technology. These are supposed to be the top 20, but there are so many more that we do. So many other services that are offered in this language services industry. Now, I'd like to take a moment also to talk about types of translation. So yes, translation, there are different types of documents that we can translate or we translate. So it's scientific translation in this sense. We refer to translation of documentation on or related to scientific research. These can comprise cutting-edge research. And examples of such documents are journal articles, research papers, experiment, or trial results, right? Technical translation, in this case, in this particular case, we are defining technical here in a very narrow sense to mean text related to all forms of engineering, industrial and manufacturing sector, IT, etc. Examples of text that we translate under technical will be such things as product data sheets, catalog, technical and user manuals, specialist reports, material data safety sheets, maintenance manuals, and so on. Now, general translation. It is called general because these are documents that also can contain some jargons or specialized terminology, like maybe, but then the terms or those terminology will not affect your understanding because of the nature of the text. So, so these are non-specialized texts, even though they might get have some of those jargons in specific domain. Examples of them will include like newspaper articles, reports, business correspondence, and so on and so forth. And medical translation. This covers a wide range of areas. And it includes text on pharmaceutical and medical products, healthcare, biotech materials, etc. Examples will include like results of clinical trials, medical reports, patient information, and other types of documents. Financial translation. Some people refer to it as economic translation. This translation covers text such as a text related to banking, financial reporting, forex, stock exchange, economy as in economy of a country, and even the field of study called economics, academic field of study. Others refer to this, as I said, also as economic translation. Now, patent translation is documentation related to intellectual property. Examples could be like patent specifications, prior art documents, and so on. Commercial translation. Others refer to commercial translation also as business translation. And this refers basically to any document generated within the world of business. So as we can see or have already seen, some other documents that are like technical documents or medical or financial that are related to running of a business could also fall under this. So we can look at business or commercial translation. Such proposals could be examples, reports, business correspondence, marketing materials, promotional materials, agreements, and so on. Marketing translation. Now, this marketing translation, as I just mentioned, it could also fall under commercial translation or business translation. But the reason why it's separated is that most of the time we do marketing or advertising to, produce some effects or emotional people to sell things to them or do stuff like that. When it comes to this type of translation, we need creative writing. So it's a specialized area in terms of translation. It combines the use of language, culture, and emotion. So we actually call this type of translation transcreation. So it's not so much on the words, but it's on the concept and the emotions that you want to recreate. Even sometimes in images or videos, you might have an image that is applicable to a particular culture, but not to another. For instance, if we know that in some cultures, you cannot be in bikini and be on the beach. So if we are promoting something in that area and we have videos with people in bikini, if you want to do it somewhere else, you might have to get people who are well covered up so that you can still drive home the same message. Now we have legal translation. This is also a very broad field. It covers generally translation of text related to law or legal process. This requires knowledge of legal system, knowledge of legal writing styles, and examples will include like legislation, court judgments, legal reports, etc. Then one last one to touch on here would be literary translation. Basically refers to translation of poems, essays, novels, plays, short stories, or other forms of literary works. Now, like I mentioned a moment ago, some of these could fall under other categories as well. If you look at medical, for instance, we can talk about medical devices. Of course, they are manufactured. Part of that can be under technical, or even the research on that can be classified as scientific. So they are not clear cut, but these are generally grouped this way to help us identify the kinds of translations we do. Now, I'd like to touch also on modes of translation. Now, the reason why I brought this one here also is that this can affect, for instance, you approach someone to translate for you. The mode of translation can affect the cost, it can affect the quality, and also the timeline, the turnaround time. So we do have machine translation, which we, for example, Google Translate. Yes, this is super fast. It's super fast, but the quality is poor. It can also be cheap. Machine translation and human light post editing. I have an image that I'll mention the second one, I can use them to explain. So machine translation, practically you use machine to translate the text, but then you have a human being review it. And when you do the first one, the light post editing, practically this is what the human reviewer will look at. Lexicon, errors related to that, syntax, errors related to that. All of the other, style, fluency, less obvious errors will now be tackled. So that's the second one. Now, this one also could be done faster than other forms. Then we also have machine translation and plus human full post editing. And the full post editing includes all of these 5 things. So the full post editing, you include, they will read thoroughly to look up for other errors that are not easily identifiable. But you have to take someone who is very thorough to be able to identify that, to include style, to include fluency. Then we also have human translation. Now, human translation, let's say you have a 2-page letter or 1-page letter or an email you want to share with someone. It's short. Or it cannot be it can be so many pages of documents. You have one human being translate that. Now, what happens here is, if it's a short document, it's okay. That one human being can translate it, put it aside for a few hours, come back to edit it and catch the error. But if it's a big document, it's gonna take a lot of time. So yeah, that can also be done. But if it's a big document, the likelihood that there'll be a lot of errors in it is very high. Then we have another form here that is human translation and human editing, where a separate person translates and then another person reviews to make all the corrections. Now, this last one can have an added component, which we call proofreading, where now in both the translation and the editing, the human translation, human editing, that the human being uses both the source language or source text and then the translation. The editor will look at both. But the proofreading aspect, we can only give the translated text to the native speaker to review to ensure that it sounds natural. So these are forms of translation. As I said, if you have two human beings like the last one translating, that will cost more than only one human being. If they added one, the proofreading, that will be a third person doing that. That's also the added cost. Machine translation alone, like Google, will be cheaper than machine translation with light post editing. Light post editing, the task of the human being is less. So that could also be cheaper. If you have the full post editing, involves more work and more time. So all of this can determine the cost. So it's good for us when someone wants to translate for us to find out the mode or they are using to be able to understand why one person is cheaper than the other. If you have two people who give you different rates for the same thing, you can ask them what the mode they're using and what the process is. Now, so we move mainly to what we've been trying to do tonight, which is technical translation. Now, within the context of this webinar, we are defining technical translation broadly. And what this means is that it's anything, any text that requires specialist knowledge in a specific domain. So the types of translations I showed you earlier, a lot of those, medical, legal, and all of those can qualify as technical translation in this sense, because they need the translator needs specialist knowledge. Now, even within these domains, like I'm picking, for example, manufacturing or industrial, manufacturing, we can look at a subdomain like mining, a subdomain like petroleum equipment, mining equipment, or chemical products where there are complex compounds over there. It's not everybody, even within a technical domain, could specialize in some of those things. So we need people who can specialize specifically in some of these areas. I think I see the question. Let me try and pull that up real quick.
Yes, you do. I can read it out for you. It says, Carol is asking, does proofreading have a comparative component to ensure not only text is correct, but numbers and symbols that may appear in the original form of a specific language?
Very good question. Actually, that is not applicable to, yes, but it's not applicable to only in the proofreading aspect. And in some slides further down, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those. But for instance, when someone should translate for you in America, in the United States, you start the date, for instance, with the month, and then you put the day. Like today's date is 10/20/2021, right? If you're translating for a British audience or another audience, one question we'll ask you if you give us a text is, do you want us to change the date, localize it? Some people will say yes, some people will say no. Or let's say you are doing something that is, you've quoted the amount of money in dollars, and it's supposed to go to Chinese or Japanese or using the European Union. We will ask you, do you want us to change the currency and things like that? I assume that that's what the question is about, right? Let me know if that's what the question is, if that answers it. Does proofreading have a comparative component to ensure only text incorrect, but not, yes. So yes, we do. This is a question that whoever is handling your translation should ask you. They should not assume, because it changes from client to client. Some clients will tell you, don't do it, others will say do it. Please, does that answer your question? But I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Okay, thank you. All right. So again, life sciences will also be a domain, a subdomain or subcategory of medical. But even under life sciences, we can still look at another subcategory like medical devices or clinical trials. So we need people who have the knowledge in those areas to be able to translate text in those areas. Now, generally for technical translation, these are some examples of text that will come across or that a technical translator can encounter and translate. Now, stakeholders. Now, when we receive a text to translate, sometimes we might think that only the person or the company that receives the text plays a role. But in actual fact, a quality translation or the way, what factors that affect translation actually start from the client side. For us, we can describe those like teams, those people who manufacture products, even some technical writer, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the organizations you work for instance, those in manufacturing, you have a team, the product team that will handle all of this and even help the writers to understand the subject matter and to be able to create the documentation, describe certain things to them for them to create appropriate documentation. So the initial, all of these processes, then you have different versions of drafts, revisions, and then you come up with a final file or document before you even think about the translator. So the quality starts from that area already. Depending on how the document, I think on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about that. The way the document is written can affect translation, especially if the translation team does not know how to ask very important questions or review the initial text. So on the vendor side, those who do the translation will have a team that will do initial translation, editing, formatting. The formatting comes in when we have different types of files. Generally, what they are supposed to do is that the only thing that should change should be the language. So the way your text is formatted, whether in a Word file, in a PDF, or in XML or other file formats, they should not mess anything up. There are some folks who cannot handle scripting or coding in some of these HTML codes or XML files, things like that. They should be able to do that. The only thing that should change should be the language. The formatting should remain the same. So all of these are factors that should be looked at. Quality control. Is the correct terminology used? Is the terminology used consistently? Is everything translated or some things are missing? Some people in a process can jump a sentence or two or a word or two, or might even use what you call false friends. A word sounds almost the same in another language, so you picked it and put it in. So all of this will have to be checked. So these stakeholders will put in two broad groups here. Please, yes.
Hi, Anukware. I have a question. Would a good translator, you said with formatting, they shouldn't change it, but I'm thinking of instances where in a lot of Western languages, the language you read from left to right, but there's others such as Hebrew and Arabic that read right to left, and even some Asian languages go from top to bottom. Is that something where translators can actually help with formatting in that respect? You know, as long as they understand how it's formatted and divided up in clearly in the source language, then they can make the transition into a language that doesn't format it the same way, such as like reading right to left.
You're right. This is actually a task for them. You're right. So Arabic, for instance, yeah, we receive an English text that is left to right, but the Arabic we should give you should be right to left, because that's how the language works. So that's also our work. We need to know how to do that, and we do that. Whether in a Word file or in an XML, we have to do that. So we have internal teams that know how to use whichever tool we are using, technology, they'll be able to format it correctly. There are things that are put online. Even some, we looked at some adjacent services earlier on. One thing also we do, for instance, is if you send us XML file and we translate. I keep saying we here, not only CETRA, but I'm talking about language services providers. But I'll be a little specific later by showing you a few things that we at CETRA do. We, as a language services providers, can go online and do what we call online review. People call it link testing. After you put the Arabic text or the Japanese text online, we want to go in there and make sure that for instance, in formatting we are talking about here, we want to make sure the Arabic text displays the way it's supposed to be. For Japanese, bite size of the characters can switch. We want to make sure they display well. For French or Spanish, we want to make sure diacritics and accent marks all display very well. So we'll go back in there, review it, send you a report. If you have a programming team in-house, we'll ask them to correct some of those things to make sure that whatever is put live or goes live reflects what you want your target audience to see. Okay. So to answer your question, yes, that's what the translators should be doing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, so we talk about stakeholders. Now, some important factors also we need to look at. That the clarity of the source source text. Like I said earlier on, the quality of every translation starts with the initial text. Now, it's not to say that translators or linguists are not educated. We use native speakers, but again, I'll review the criteria for qualified linguists shortly. We use the linguists who are also educated, close to near native level in the source language. So someone translating from English to French, the person is French, but has studied English very well. Yes, that said, the quality of the writing that is sent to the linguist to translate is important. Now, sometimes a lot of us in the industry will review the text, come back to the client, your sentence read this, should you read that? Sometimes we get linguists correcting the initial document. So it's important for the document to be clear, written clearly. Now, some of the things that we could look at is, even in technical translation, there could be jargons or sometimes could be used differently, right? Idioms could even come in there. Different professionals might say things in different ways, sometimes in different countries. I talked about medical devices earlier on one of the slides. That is an industry that's heavily regulated. Every country has its own way to do things. So the writing of it and the translation of it, all of them must align with what the needs or the laws are. So compliance with those systems or rules are very important. So there is also in this case what we can classify as false friends. Again, I'll give an example shortly. So clarity of the source document is very important. Another thing is the target country. Anukware, we have a French document. We have an English document we need to translate into French. Well, Anukware will ask you, do you want it for French Canada, or French for France, or you want it for French to be used in West Africa or Central Africa, or Portuguese? Do you need it for Portugal, Angola, or Brazil? Spanish, do you need for Spain, Mexico, Argentina? Because depending on the type of text, certain things might be used differently. So the local, the target audience. And a couple of days ago, Danielle and I spoke, and she gave me very nice examples, actually, particularly from British English, for example, gas station as compared to petrol station, or flat versus apartment. I remember when I was in primary school, and I saw the word program written with one M. I ran to my dad and I told him it's spelled wrongly. And he told me, no, that's how they write it in America. I had no idea about America at that time, right? Because I grew up learning to write the word program with double M, M-E, right? So things like that. So if we determine the locale and the target audience, we'll have to tweak the text to do that. Now, target audience. We can have a research paper on diabetes that a diabetes patient to read and will not understand. But the same research paper can be rewritten and translated for a diabetes patient to understand. So it's important when the document is put out, if you don't tell us that this is for a diabetic patient or a cancer patient or a cancer researcher or a diabetes researcher, we will come back to ask you, because we want to make sure that the translation targets the very person you want to read the material. Now, sometimes we also need reference materials. You send us the text, it's a writing, maybe there are some terms in it. A linguist might not know. If you readily have a glossary explaining those terms, you can share with us. And we can share with the linguist as well. Sometimes, for instance, I'll share one example about Philadelphia in one of the slides. There are some things that should not be translated, like brand names, trademarked words, or things like that. And sometimes it takes the client to alert the translator that we don't need ABCD translator. So you give some reference, or even there's a wider document, a bigger document that expands on the theme or the theme or subject matter of that text. You can share with the linguist to read and make reference to make sure that the translation will be translated, will be done accurately. Linguist qualification, that will be on a separate slide. Project management. Project management, for instance, some companies, including ours, who have project managers, they serve as the leader of the team. What they do, for instance, some of the things I've just said, is a project manager who reviews the source text and say, hey, Mr. Client, Madam Client, this doesn't make sense. What do you mean by this? Who really are you gonna be sending this text to? And which particular country? Or do you have some glossary to give us? The project manager will do that. The project manager will be the one to select the team members, those who translate, edit, and do the proofreading. Now, then quality control. I'll talk briefly about that on a slide below. So I talk about linguists. Now, it's important that a translator be a native speaker of the language into which he or she is translating, because that person understands more than what some of us who study foreign languages will learn in a classroom. Formal education. We believe that if the translator has a formal education in that language, the language of your education is language you can write in a little bit more comfortably. So that's also part of it. You want to make sure you're educated in that language. Your language competence in itself is important. Proficiency in specific domains. I don't know specifically what some companies that, but at CETRA, everybody who comes to us that I'm a translator, I'm a linguist, we want to make sure that you have some, you specialize in some domains. We don't work with jack of all trades. You can't translate everything. So we allow you to do up to 3. So maybe someone will say, I do legal and I do medical, and I do that. Even within those, some people tell you I can't translate this type of thing because I'm specialized in this area. Now we look at professional experience, someone who just started translating 2 months ago versus someone who's been translating 10, 20 years. Continuing education. We have organizations like American Translators Association that give training. So evidence of continuous education and training, certifications that you have, proficiency. Everybody, technology is everywhere. So we also have what we call computer-assisted translation tools. That's the CAT there, CAT tools, computer-assisted translation tools. Your proficiency in those, because most agencies use them. And what they do is that they help speed up the process. Then if you have worked with someone else, we look at those references and contact them and make sure that you are who you say you are. Now, that is on the front end. When you start working with CETRA, for instance, so these are examples from CETRA. When you start working with that, we always rate you on a lot of things, including your responsiveness. Does it take you 2 days to respond to our email, or it takes you 30 minutes to do that? How frequently, or how do you meet your timelines? Quality of the work, and the quality is greater according to some of those things I showed earlier, syntax, and other stuff, style and things. then your ability to use the CAD tools well. Some people will say they know the CAD tools, but then they work for you and they mess up all kinds of things. So we rate folks on this. Now, we just don't rate them. We keep record on them. If you fall below our threshold, we remind you. If we warn you and then you still are below, we stop working with you. So we want to maintain high quality work for our clients. So we rate our linguists on those. Again, I can't speak specifically to what other companies do, but as I've mentioned some of this, I thought I'll give the practical aspect by telling you how CETRA does it. Now, when it comes to translation, like I said, the stakeholders, right? When you look at the top here, this is the client. So this one stakeholder. This generally CETRA will be here. Then our linguist will be here. This is the process through which we take a translation project to ensure quality. I hope I can rush through really quickly, not to take too much time. So the client is here. The client sends us a request, and CETRA in the middle receives the request. The project manager will be the one to review this. And some of those things, the factors I looked at on, I think, 2 previous slides. Yes. Interesting. Okay. I saw something come. If you can give me a moment to review this. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Carol. So the project manager reviews and asks questions about clarity or references, target audience, local, and things like that. If there's a problem, which is here, any issues? Yes. Then we go back to the client. The client is up here. If there are no issues, we prepare the files for translation. Now, at our company, for instance, we have linguists. We have colleagues who do Japanese, Chinese, Korean, German, French, Spanish, Czech. So if it's a small project, can we do this internally? Can we do this in-house? If it's yes, we do it in-house. If not, then we fall on our linguist. The linguist does the project. Another question we ask is it a project that requires editing? Like I said earlier, we do only human translation as well, if it's a small document. If it does not require editing, then we proceed to prepare the file, do our quality check, deliver it to the client, right? If it requires editing, then another linguist, as I said, we have different human translation, human editing. Then the editing is done. It comes back, the project manager reviews it. Is there any problem with it? No. We go through our quality check, and then we deliver the project to the client. The client receives the file, reviews it. Does the client have any problem with it? If yes, it comes back to us. We review everything. If there are no corrections we have to do, we do it. Now, mostly this doesn't happen. Actually, we had our staff meeting today. The whole of a quarter, 3 months period, we had only one complaint, which was looked into. If there are any issues, we resolve it and deliver to the client again. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this aspect of it. Anytime there is an issue. Now, anytime we actually finish a project, we send our clients a survey. Okay, please rate our project manager and our linguist on the following. How quickly do they respond to your request? Were their communication effective? Was it value for money for you? So communication, responsiveness, right? We have actually 5 points that they rate us on. Now, if there are some issues here, what is important for us internally is that we want to make sure whatever happened does not happen in the future. So we will review it, investigate it. Internally, we have a quality manager. If there is a problem, truly, what we would do is we'll retrain the entire team. So it calls for what we call CAR, corrective action request, for everybody. So anybody related to that project will be written, because the goal is to make sure that does not happen again. Our goal is to facilitate and give quality work to our clients. So this is what our workflow is like at CETRA, to make sure that we deliver quality work to our clients. Now, this is one tool also we use for our quality check. As you can see here, this tool, when we finish the translation, we put the text in. It reviews every single segment. We call it segment, looks like a sentence. It can tell us what is not consistent. If something is missing, let's say this is supposed to be English to Italian. If in the Italian there is an English text, it tells us. And then we'll have to go in to translate. We don't want to deliver a translation to you that still has English text or is not consistent. So we have various things that we do for quality control. Now, again, anybody can show up and say, I am a language services provider. One thing you can do also as a client is to find out about people's quality process. I just showed you our workflow and some of our quality things we do. You can ask them. That can give you confidence as to how well they can do your work for you. It's very important. Now, out there too, there are standards. So they can also tell you for which one they are certified or which professional conduct they follow. So our company is a corporate member of the American Translators Association, the biggest of that type of organization in the world. We follow the conduct of professional business conduct and business practices, and we are also ISO certified. What this means is that every year we go through the rigorous review process from outside quality folks. Internally, we do it every 3 months. Every 3 months, we conduct our own internal quality work to make sure that these standards, we are meeting them. We are also a member of the American Standards for Translation organization. Some of our members, actually, our staff members belong to some of these groups and serve on them. So there could be others that other people have. You can ask them the standards they follow, those that they are certified for, to build your confidence that they can do what they say they can do, or at least have gone through some process to be qualified for what they're supposed to be doing. Now, I mentioned false friends quite a bit. So the term here, the word here, medical, and medical sounds like could be okay, right? But this person says that, for instance, it says anything, the word medical, if it's related to anything like healthcare, should be translated as sanitario. So the medical device will be translated as producto sanitario. But I tell you, if you Google on the internet, you find translation with medical as well. We all know the internet is full of good, very good things and full of very bad things as well. So it will take someone who knows that in Spanish and Catalan, medically, things that the term medical, which relates to healthcare, has to be translated as sanitario, right? So then to avoid the use of false friends, simply because it sounds like it and it's also in the other language, it has to be translated like that, right? So things like that also happen. So many things can get into it, but this is just one tiny bit of an example for us to look at. Now, just have a little fun here. At CETRA, our colleagues travel quite a bit. So when they travel, they try to get, things like this get their attention. So this particular image here, our CEO traveled to Macau, and then he found this. So that is the Chinese. At the bottom is the English. Keep the nature, value the paper. But one of our colleagues actually said it's supposed to be protect the environment, save paper. And then the tiny one at the bottom said, you should have any comment. Please do not hesitate to ask. Right? It's supposed to be, if you have any comment, please do not hesitate to contact us. So things like this, right? We call them funny fails. So in the summer, particularly, a lot of our colleagues return to the office with examples like this. Now, this could be just a sign for a tourist, but do we know if someone is not qualified and translates, go to the court to do interpretation or translate a document that is supposed to be used in diagnosing a patient, or a document that's supposed to be in the courts? This can decide between someone going to jail or being acquitted, right? So that's important. Or someone who doesn't have a particular disease being diagnosed with one because the translation is poor. So here it's a funny one for us. This could be easily ignored, but in other contexts, it could be between life and death. Now, this is an important one. This is the Philadelphia metro area chapter, so this is close. Now, this is from a long time. This is from around 2010. And I want to confess that machine translation has improved since then. But around this time, the city of Philadelphia decided to connect its website to Google Translate and not have professionals translate them. So the technology doesn't know that the mayor's name is Street, John Street. The technology is just translating words. So he translated his name as Juan Lacalle, right? A human translator will leave the name John Street in the Spanish. Then the lead story is also translated as Historia del Plomo. Now, plomo in this sense, plomo means differently, but plomo in this sense could mean like the story of lead as in lead paint, right? So, machine translation, these are some of the downfall of it, or the weak area. So for this particular website, the Philadelphia City government's website, the mayor's name was translated into French, Monsieur Larue, into Spanish, Señor Lacalle, and things like that, different things happening. So again, this is just to have a little fun. I'm not sure how much this really affected people at that time, but we're having fun. But as I said earlier on, in some circumstances, this could be very, very dangerous. Now, I like to stop here. I still have one slide, just one slide, but I like to stop here for us to share any stories we have, any questions we have, any comments we have before I finish up. I'm going to turn my camera back on.
Well, I guess I'm usually the person to kick things off and commentary and stuff. I've been doing translation writing in some way, not that I actually translate, but writing for translation. And I think we were just talking about this the other night too, that sometimes there's certain things that we look at, and it doesn't have to be super technical, like scientific or manufacturing. In the department that I'm in right now, I'm doing human resources, and part of that is talking about benefits and things like that. And I was reviewing an article the other day and it used the expression dropping benefits, that, if you have some life event that goes on and you don't want to still have your benefits, you can drop them. And I was thinking about it and said, well, that doesn't work, because if I'm very used to translating English into English, meaning I have a mother-in-law whose English is not very good at all. And so I have to simplify what I have to say and shorten it so she understands. So if I told her, oh, this company is going to drop your benefits, she would look at me like, as if, benefits, like it was being dropped on the floor. So changing that word drop to discontinue. Oh, okay, I get that. So sometimes it's like little nuances like that, and you can confirm this for me, Anukware, but it's the sort of thing that little changes like that make it also easier for the translator to understand the actual meaning of what needs to go on, and that makes the process a little bit faster as well. There's things like that, and I think there is a responsibility for technical writers to make sure, as UX writers, to have to do that. I worked for another company about 5 years ago, and we were doing a big, huge global project, and our instructions were we had to write instructions on how to do things with to make sure that people clicked the correct button or selected the right thing to have the right action happen. And what would happen is I would question certain things, and my manager at that time would say, oh, don't worry about it, the translators will take care of it. I'm like, No, that's not their job. That's our job to make sure that our instructions are clear and as simplified and using as plain English as possible. So that way, when the translation is done, it's done accurate. Like the drop example is a very good example of that. You know, we use that expression very openly or very commonly in the U.S. to say that we're discontinuing a benefit if we're not going to be using it anymore. But
Yes.
we should be using that. So that's part of my own experience. I'd be curious to hear what
That's
other kinds
great.
of experiences.
Yeah, that's great, Danielle. Like that's why it's like we said, we use native speakers for just that. They understand the idioms, the slang, the everyday usage of the language. But the translators are translating from a second or sometimes a third language, even though they do not know the slang and the idiomatic expressions and things like that. So that's where what you said comes in as help. I sort of say to drop off, or instead of just using simply discontinue can be easily understood by the native speaker of the language into which the translation is being done, right? As opposed to the source one, which is not native to him. So you help, again, they are educated, and also project managers at our end can also help them, but you make it easier for sure once you eliminate a lot of those. So that's a great point. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Oh,
I also
sure.
see two comments from, yeah, Lisa said, yes, it's important to avoid
Idioms and
it's
slang.
important to avoid idiom and slang. And then you added that, yes, you must write simply and then literally. Okay. And Carol says, does the ISO certification requirements relate to the type of domains in which you offer translation? Not all of them. I think the list you've put there, I think the medical part, particularly the medical devices. Medical devices part is very, very heavily regulated. The others, the ISO is mostly about the standard. For instance, we show them how we do business, and they want, because they don't want us to come out there and promise people, say one thing, but then internally do a different thing. So they come in to look at all the things we do, and then they come to audit us all the time to ensure that we do that. We keep that standard. But among that, looking at the list you sent, medical devices is one that needs special certification to go through. Not all industry. If it exists for some others, I'm not very, very sure at this point. But I can talk about medical devices. Yes.
There's other things that you have to consider too. You know, most of the people who are in this audience are mostly writers, but there's also things such as imagery and symbols. I think Carol brought that up a little bit earlier. I remember doing an interview with somebody where they were an instructional designer and they had done a course for an Arab country. And he was trying to say something about teaching some sort of a content course and said content is king, and put a image of a crown, but it had a cross on it. In an Arabic country that's mostly Muslim, that would be kind of offensive. So he was like, okay, I learned that the hard way, you know. So you have to kind of, or there's even things where if you choose the wrong color, you have to kind of be aware of your color choices in some cases. So
yeah,
you know, with some countries, especially Western countries, when we see red, we think of anger or aggressiveness or something like that. Whereas in China, it's happy.
that's
It's a happy
happiness.
color.
Yes.
You know, whereas we might think a different color might be a happy color. You know, things like that. Or the expression "green with envy." That's an English based expression. I know my husband would look at me like, "What, green with envy? What are you talking about?" You know, and he's a Spanish speaker. So you know, there's things like that you have to be really, really careful with.
Yes, you're all making great points. Thank you so much. Yes,
Sure.
Red and black for me, I originally from Ghana, we use those for funeral. When we are happy and celebrating, we use white, right? So exactly, the same point there. Very good. Yes. So again, a little bit about the ISO. There are different ISO standards and that to which people are certified, but we do the 9001, the 2015, which is the most relevant one for translation. So for manufacturing and other areas, there are different types. There are many, to be honest, that I cannot speak to. But directly related to translation, for a translation agency even to work with market device manufacturers and translator documentation, it's another level you have to go through. So pertaining to our, those are the two I can talk about, but there are many, many, many ISO standards out there. The vast majority to which I cannot speak, to be honest. Yes, any other comments, please, or question?
Sharon mentioned here that she, Carol said cultural competence, and Courtney said good point. Sharon mentions
Yes.
I've had to provide contextual information around phrases and text used on, I'm not sure where SW is supposed to be, user interfaces, so that the translator can select the most appropriate wording.
Yes.
Software,
Yes.
thank you.
That aspect.
There's an
Yeah.
example. Sometimes what's an abbreviation for us is not the same universally. So that's a good example, right?
The other thing that I bumped into in translating, getting software user interface translated,
Yes.
if you have to have text being placed on a button per se on an interface, and in English, it's easy to truncate some of those words and abbreviate them, where what I ran into is like you may not have that option in your translated language. There may not be a way to abbreviate that word. So sometimes some of the software people have to go back and change some of their interface to accommodate longer line lengths to accommodate those words.
Yeah.
Point.
Yes. Great point. Yes. The yeah, that's included in a larger point. I mean, maybe I may I ask you, so in this particular project you just referred, what kind of document, in which file format was the document being done, for instance?
You mean the translation? Well, actually, I had to send the software strings in on an Excel spreadsheet and send that in, because we were doing multiple languages at the same time.
Okay. The reason why I ask is that sometimes the way you program it online, unless it's something that is not culturally appropriate, when you send XML or even the Excel, if people have a way of handling the scripting language, that should not be a problem. It's only the text part that they'll translate, and then when you repopulate or upload it into your system, those radio buttons and things should be maintained. It's only the language that will change and the formatting. So sometimes also it depends on the capability of whether the people are tech savvy or not.
Well, the product was a medical device, and it was for X-ray software.
Oh, okay.
So there were a lot of buttons and options for a technician to select.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if that is programmed and you send XML file to some people, because sometimes when some of these files, like online things like that, move from one file format or one system into maybe Word or Excel, still people don't know how to handle the scripting aspect, so they can mess it up. Yeah, so some people, including our company, can translate directly with the XML, which you can just upload back in there and the display will be fine. If it is not, sometimes we, like I said earlier, we do what we call online review or link testing, where we click through the entire page to make sure everything, the linguist will ensure that it displays very well, that the radio button is not here and the text is at the other side, or a word that is supposed to have a diacritic is it's changed all over the place, and the what do you call it? Things, the display is not good. So they can review and also correct. But generally, if they do it well initially and you upload, it should not be a problem. Sometimes it has to do with the technical knowledge of the translation team as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle has a question here. Is there a rule of thumb about how many characters are added to phrases or text when translating Spanish or Canadian French, where character limits are concerned for fields or drop downs?
That not applicable. Like, not, I would say no if you say rule of thumb. But one thing we know is that translating English into Romance languages, usually the text expand by like a third of it. So design-wise, the programmers will have to take that into consideration. That said, we did a project for where we see this quote-unquote rule of thumb for some of this particular project we did was an organization that was conducting polls, surveys on cell phone. Because the cell phone is tiny and the display, we were forced to translate not beyond certain number of characters for it to display properly. So that was extremely difficult for translators to rethink the choice of words to make sure that they fell within those number of characters. But apart from this particular project, generally we do not receive things with such restrictions. But what we know generally is that if we translate from English into French or Spanish, Italian, we expect the text to be longer by a third. Vice versa. We are translating from French or Spanish into English, it's going to reduce by that. So if it's something you're going to be putting side by side, you want to put that into consideration, whether one, the font sizes are reduced, or the other is blown up to match it. So that's what I
would imagine some of that also has to deal with working with your IT group, because then you're starting to talking about the programming itself with responsive designing between like a desktop or laptop view versus a tablet view versus a mobile view. To your point, you know, it's got to resize, and depending on how that program has been set up, maybe it can accommodate that whole field and a longer translated, you know, whatever that longer word or group of words translated is, depending on how the programming is done. So, you know, I think there's like multiple factors going on there sometimes.
Yes, and this is why we continue to see more and more adjacent services coming in, because in the past, a company will just outsource somebody, or the end client will go to a completely different person to do certain things. But we see more and more organized companies in our field bringing some of those services in, even though they are not the core aspect of our services. They are having departments and, you know, having partnerships. So then it's becoming like a one-stop shop where, in addition to our main thing, we can help you deal with the other one, either by doing it ourselves, or we have a partner who can help you. Yes, I think there's another.
Carol, I'm just going to go in order here. Carol says, very clarifying and exacting business model and rewarding presentation and language translation services. Again, your standard of quality is one of the most impressive approaches I have reviewed to date, which is great. I think
well,
you know, one of the things that I kind of had said to earlier when we did a dress rehearsal is that one of the things I liked about this particular presentation is that while Anukware is presenting CETRA's standards, it kind of helps you get an idea of what any translator, whether you go with his company or another one, the things you should be looking for. And I felt that, you know, being a little bit more agnostic was kind of a nice way to go. Courtney asks, I may have missed this, but is it standard practice to create a translation memory for an organization to capture typical phrases and terms to make it easier and more efficient to translate lots of content? And Carol's response is yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. My answer, based on my experience, would be no, but it is done. So unless a client says, okay, CETRA, this is our field of work, and we believe that you should keep our memory separately. Now, so the creation of translation memory, I'm not sure if everybody here understands, but it's practically a database. So each time we translate, there's like a database, we keep the translations in. So let's say company A comes to us, company B comes to us, company C comes to us. We are able to keep, if they are all doing medical translation, we can put all of them, their medical translation in one database, right? So then we keep that for consistency's sake. But there are some companies, like company A, will say, you know what, yes, you might have clients who do the same thing, but me, company A, I want my translation memory to be separated from company B and C, in which case we can do it. But we don't necessarily create one for every client who comes to us, unless the client asks. But that's a very good question.
I would imagine that in some cases it depends on what the terminology is going to be. So, for example, I remember being told or being taught at one point that even using the example that you had given with the idea of the word medical, and medical could be translated as literal medical, and it could also be in sanitario, which would be used for devices specifically or health related things versus something medical specifically. Yes. So it depends. But the example I was always given is that in English, we could say the word dog in a multiple ways. We can say dog, poop, puppy, Fido, rover, you know, and there's different ways. And so you have to pick one or maybe even two, depending on the context, to have that would be part of your translation memory. So that's something that, you know, I think sometimes will happen. Now, Michelle also asks, is it common practice for translating an entire content management system to get an API TP extract all the content to a translation company?
I can see, where is the question?
It's the third one from the bottom.
Okay, yeah, now it's coming in. Okay. Yes, please read. It's a common practice for translating. Okay.
So this is Michelle. Sorry. So if you have a large project where you're translating all the content from one content management system, so instead of sending like hundreds and thousands of separate files and documents, have you ever used an API system where you linked into a company's CMS system and extracted all the information from it?
Yes, but not in every case.
Yeah.
Yes. It depends. Another thing also is that we use a tool called SDL Trado Studio. So it does have some of these APIs that you can connect to other systems, like in this case you're talking about. It doesn't exist for everybody. So where there is, yes, we can pull it. We can connect to it and get that done, but not in every instance. Now the other part of your question, to get an API extract, okay, all the content, yes, but not for every single project. Sometimes, again, when clients come to us, we try to explain to them what we need this, and we said, well, you can do it this way. For instance, I mentioned earlier on about XML, where people export to Word, and the process is longer. You translate it, put it back into the XML before they upload and things like that. We explain to them. So some people, the API system, for instance, will exist, but they will still insist that they want to send us individual or single files to translate. But to your question, yes, there is a situation where that is done. But mostly for our case, it will be important for us to verify that an API exists between our tool we use and the system you are also using.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Thank you. If we don't have any other question or comment,
there's a couple more. Carol had just mentioned that it sounds like plain language concepts, which would be a great repository to develop for other aspects, which I'm sure you would agree with that. Yes. Lisa was just saying thanks for it because she had to drop. And Courtney asks, how does pricing typically work? Again, thinking of a larger project such as a CMS system or HRIS system, things like that. How does that pricing generally work in broad terms?
Okay, pricing. Different people charge differently, etc. So there is per word charge, which most people use, right? But it is important anytime anybody sells you, we charge per word, but our per word rate is this. One thing I'll say here is that always ask them what is included in that rate. Now, you see, we looked at the methods of translation. Someone will come to you and say, I'm charging you 10 cents or 20 cents per word. And then he's going to do human translation and will tell you later on, then you want it edited, they will charge you extra. There's someone who comes to you and said that 20 cents or 15 cents per word includes translation, editing, proofreading, project management, and everything, right? So it's important to understand the per word charge, what goes into it. That's one. So that's mostly everybody charges per word rate, but whatever that rate covers seems to be different for different people.
Well, didn't you tell me the other night that there's times that, like, for instance, it might be main words, but words like of and the and might not necessarily be included, for example?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. It's not every single word that is. So prepositions, for instance, are generally not counted. So
yeah, I think just to. Sorry, can you hear me? This is Courtney.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just sort of to build on that, because kind of what I was getting at in some of the translation memory question too, is when you're kind of using a lot of the same content and you're repeating it in different fashions, let's say, you know, trying to understand kind of how that works from a pricing perspective when it's just a lot of repeat in different formats or yeah, and that's
so I can add something to that here. So there is another advantage to that. So if there's a translation memory that is being kept for you, what we do is for that client, the new project that comes in, we run it through it. If there is a sentence or terminology or something in the new text that has already been translated, you are not charged the full rate for that. So there is a discount on that. And also, depending on the type of client, if you're a very high volume client, you get some volume discount as well. We do that. If someone is giving us $2,000 project a month versus someone giving us $200,000 project a month, it's for keeping us in business. We like to run some kind of discount program for clients as well. So yes, but directly related to translation memory, so we call them repeats or 100% context match, or we have a breakdown. So depending on the level, so we have new word, which means that has not been translated. So we are going to translate that from scratch. That will be the full rate, right? But if it is already translated and is repeated, it has a discounted rate. Does that help?
Okay, yes, that does help. Thank you.
All right. So one thing I'd like to add here is that, yes.
There is one more question here. Sharon asks, if our company has existing translations in a specific topic that we are currently using, will your company take in that translation file and add it to our repository to help translate future materials? It sounds like you answered that question already.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, that's good. We can get those. If you're a client who wants a special memory to be created for you, create it and put your existing translations into it. And then when you bring your future ones, we can use that to edit. Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions right now? No? Okay. Well, we've had a lot of good questions. This has been a great conversation.
Absolutely.
So I'll let you finish up.
Yes. So I truly appreciate your comments and examples and questions. Thank you very, very much. So CETRA was founded in 1997. We have a global reach. We have 4 offices in 3 countries. Actually, used to be 6 offices in 5 countries, but you know, it's not easy to operate in every country the same way. So we had to close some due to difficulty in operating a business. So language services we provide, we serve, this is just an example of some of the sectors we serve, but we do many, many more. Market research, life sciences, advertising, legal, technology, meetings and conferences. So we also provide things like interpretation. So large conferences, we provide all of that. We work with government. And last month, we helped the US government with the CHO, the Chiefs of Defense Conference, that we provide like close to 29 languages for them at the conference. Our language count is of well over 250 languages. And as I talk about linguist recruitment, we have well over 5,000 linguists globally that we work with to cover those over 250 languages. And we always promise our clients exceptional customer service, responding fast, making sure we give you a quality product. Now, this is our global headquarters contact information. But if you need to contact me personally, this will be my direct phone number and my email. And on this note, I want to
can't remember,
say
they
again
can
that
always,
actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, if they can't remember, they can just contact me at president@stcpmc.org, and I can forward the information as well.
Yes. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Danielle, for facilitating this. And I look forward to future webinars with the Philadelphia Metro chapter. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And again, everyone, we at the chapter, we absolutely appreciate having Anukware help us out. Like I said, he is a chapter member for Philadelphia, so I was really thrilled that we were able to get him and that he was more than happy to help us out. We've been kind of keeping in contact since July, so this has been several months in the planning. If you have any questions, again, you can forward them through me or contact Anukware directly. And if there aren't any other questions, I think we're good. And we appreciate you coming. And we'll hopefully have the recording up within the next day or two, hopefully if I can find the time. And we'll have it posted on our website very shortly. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Anukware, for your great presentation. I think it was really very educational. I think it gave a lot of great points on things that people should be looking for in a translation company, and keeping things in mind and how we should be approaching our own content in a global sense. So I think we had a really good night here and some really good information. Thanks again. And thank you everyone for attending. Have a good night.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.